thing here. You have God's people have been in exile in Babylon for 70 years. And now you have God leading them to freedom. And they're re-inhabiting the land that was promised to them, to their ancestors. So that's kind of interesting. The first thing that they do when they get back is what? Yeah, they construct an altar to worship God. That's very similar to some things that you see elsewhere in the Bible, right? Look at Genesis chapter 8. In Genesis 8, you have the story of Noah. And Noah, again, you have a story of deliverance. Noah was delivered by the flood into a cleansed earth. And the first reaction Noah has, after spending all that time on the ark, finally the waters subside. Verse 18, so Noah went out with his sons, his wife, his sons' wives with them. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by the families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt sacrifice on the altar. Noah's response, God has delivered me. I have been spared by the destruction that has consumed the whole rest of the world. And his response to that is, well, I'm going to go and worship God and sacrifice to God in response to that. You see a similar thing with Abram. You go back to Genesis chapter 12. God promises Abraham, or Abram at this point, go where I lead you, and I'll lead you into the land of Canaan. And Abram just picks up and leaves. And that's an incredible thing, just to pick up, leave everything that you know, and follow after God. You read verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give you this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. And so again, you have promises that God makes, and promises that God's going to keep. And so Abram responds through worship. He responds by making sacrifices to God and praising God. That's the same thing that the people are doing here in Nehemiah or in Ezra. They have been delivered from the Persians, from the Babylonians. And so their response is to worship. Their time in Babylon must have been pretty traumatic for a lot of reasons. Some of them had fairly good lives. You have some that are very successful. Nehemiah seems to have done well for himself. He's serving the king. Daniel, obviously, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're doing well. But this is not the life that any one of them wants to be living. They want to be back to the promised land. And it's got to be some fairly strong trauma of having their homes burned, even if they didn't live there. The homes that they would have had, the lives that they would have had, be destroyed. For us, how often, after periods of trial and periods of great challenges, is it ever our response after those times or during those times to worship? That's their first response. They've gone through this great trial, and the first thing that they go and do is worship. What do you think? Is that our natural response?
Prayer.
Prayer is.
I don't know how much beyond that we go, but I think prayer definitely is. Is for me.
Well, that's good. Prayer is. We need to be praying prayers of thankfulness, and I think that's very important. Sometimes our prayers are kind of checklists. I have this long list of requests, and perhaps we need to pray a bit more for thanks. Any other thoughts? Is this something we're good at after periods of trial? Our first inclination being to worship.
Sometimes that's the time that all men pray to God.
you need traumatic events, big events are wake-up calls, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, but you have major devastating events like 9/11, and what you saw in the aftermath of 9/11 was a big, although somewhat short-lived revival. People went back to church, and people were thinking about the things that are most important. So you have an interesting thing here in verse 3. They set the altar in its place, and then you have the reason. For fear was on them because of the peoples of the land. And they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening. And so you have, not only are they just motivated by faith, which obviously they ought to be motivated by faith, because God has delivered them and done great things for them, and the proper response to God's blessings is gratitude, and gratitude expressed through worship. I think the Bible teaches that pretty clearly. But they're also motivated by fear. Why are they afraid? What are they afraid of?
The wrath of God, well,
Yeah.
they're afraid of the surrounding peoples.
Yeah.
And the reaction of the surrounding peoples to their return,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea or possibility of it happening again by a different world leader, or
Yeah.
there's a multitude of different things that they're afraid of.
Yeah. Charlie?
Well, they rebuke people also when they come and wanted to have a hand in redoing,
Yeah.
and they told them no. And I know that probably that made some
Yeah.
upset people there.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a lot more next week. But yeah, that's correct. So when the exile happens, I think sometimes it's easy to think that every single person was carted off to Babylon. That's not the case. Some were left behind. Some were transplanted into the land. One of the policies of Nebuchadnezzar was he wanted to make the conquered lands that he conquered. He didn't want them rising up against him. And so a big policy that he would have is he would take some people from, if I conquer land A and I conquer land B, I'm going to take some people from land A and put them in land B, and some people from B and put them in A, and so I'm going to mix and mingle all these people. And that's what happens in Israel. And so you have some intermingling. And so while Israel is destroyed, and Jerusalem is destroyed, Judah is destroyed, it's not empty. And so there have been people here who have been living here for 70 years. Some, perhaps even against their will. And now you have the return of the true heirs of the land, the return of the Israelites, and there's going to be some hostility. There's going to be some tensions. Because although they may not be original to the place, they've been there for the past 70 years. And there's going to definitely be some tensions. And we're going to see that a lot more next week in particular. But they're scared of the people that are there. And they're scared of the opposition that they're about to face. And I think that's reasonable to a degree. There's all kinds of things. Somebody's threatening your life. Somebody comes, you're going to be afraid. And so they realize that they have an acute need for God's protection, right? That they're facing challenges, existential challenges to their life. And so they need God to bless them. And often, like Colby was saying, it sometimes takes those outside existential crises that really push us to remembering what's really important. And you see that not just with major world events like 9/11, but how often has somebody had a major medical scare and they recover, or it turns out not to be as bad as they initially expected, and it serves as a wake-up call. Well, I got to start doing things better. I got to start, one, taking care of myself physically better. Two, I got to start making sure that my spiritual condition is one that I'm not afraid to die in. That happens a lot. And I think that's similar to what you see here. Have you ever heard somebody talk down upon deathbed converts? I've heard some people talk that way. You know, somebody's on their deathbed and they realize that their time on earth is limited, if not all but up. And so they decide, I want to make this right, and they call for the preacher and they're baptized. And I've at times heard people speak very negatively about that. You know, they don't really care about Christ. They don't really care about the Lord. They're just trying to sneak into heaven. Have you heard people express that kind of attitude? Is that valid? No. Perhaps fear is a major motivator for some people to get their lives back on track and decide to follow God. Is fear necessarily an obedient response motivated by a level of fear? Is that worse than any other response?
We are given that promise.
Yeah.
And I experienced that firsthand with Steve. He remembers my wife's father waited till 13th hour, he might say.
Yeah.
And Steve prayed over him the night he died. And I believe that man is in paradise according to the Bible. He is. So we experienced that firsthand with her daddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear people talk about, I'm reminded every time of Matthew chapter 20. You got the parable of the vineyards, and you have some that are working from beginning of the day until the end of the day, and you got some that join about lunchtime, and you got some that join just an hour before closing time, and the ones who the master pays them all the same wage, and the ones who've been working all day are angry. How can you let these last-minute freeloaders come in and pay them the same as you paid us? And, the response is, well, I'm the master. I'm going to give what I choose to give to whom I choose to give it. And so, for some of these people, maybe their response and their decision to worship was purely motivated by fear. We got these big scary boogeymen that are out and about, and we need God to bless us immediately. Some people may be, motivated purely by faith. God has delivered us, and let's give Him the thanks that He deserves. I don't think either of those are wrong. It's good to be motivated by faith, and you should be motivated by faith. But if you're motivated by fear, that's a good starting point for some people. And hopefully, as you grow spiritually, that fear lessens and you're more motivated by faith. But for many, fear is a good push that you need at times. Any last thoughts about that before we move on?
Well, the Bible doesn't say that you got to be a Christian so many days or years before you accept it.
Sure.
Once you believe and repent or baptized, you get out of the next hour.
Yeah.
You're still in the good graces of God.
Yeah.
And to say that sometimes the light bulb has to go off in all of our minds that something you just heard helps you realize that you're not doing what's right.
Yeah.
And you need to change. And how long might take us? I don't.
Yeah.
I hope I don't ever live. I do think about sometimes if you've heard the gospel all these times and won't obey it, how do you, Lord, feel about you? You know where in the Bible I can find it.
Yeah.
You got to be baptized so many days before you get saved.
Yeah.
Can we read hearts?
Yeah. Can we read hearts? I'm not in that business. I don't know about you.
And so the next part of that, somebody who is converted very late in life, they in a sense have cheated themselves because they have lessened the benefit of the church that they could have had for many, many years. They may reach the ultimate goal, but they sort of punish themselves on this earth.
Yeah.
You say they may? Are you saying that they may if they do what?
If you're converted late in life, you have reduced the benefits you could have received from the church all the years. A young man would receive a lot more blessings being part of the
He just
church.
gives you an example, that we're taught in the Bible, the parable of the vineyard, and the guy's coming in late.
Well, we can talk about that. We're getting off track.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You know, like Rick was saying, you think, okay, the blessings of being a good example, you wasted all that, that's gone. I'm not saying you won't be in heaven, but, you know, you wasted all those opportunities.
Yeah.
You know, so,
We'll see.
you know, yeah, those of us that been Christians most of our lives, a lot of blessings and a lot of opportunities that we've had to do good. The person that waits, you know, don't have those.
Yeah. Let's go on and finish out this little section. Chapter 3, verse 4 through 6. And they kept the Feast of Booths, as is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the rule as each day required. And after that, the regular burnt offerings and the offerings of the new moon and all the appointed feasts of the Lord and the offerings of everyone who made a free will offering to the Lord. From the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord. But the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. And so you have the keeping of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. And this is a very interesting, this is kind of a callback to, it's fitting that this is the feast that they observe here. Go back to Leviticus chapter 23. You have the description of what this feast is supposed to be. You read verse 34, speak to the people of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of the 7th month, for the 7 days, is the Feast of the Booths to the Lord. So this is kind of this is a long event. This is not just a singular day. This is going to take some time. And you skip down, verse 39 or so. This whole passage really is talking about the Feast of Booths. But verse 39, on the 15th day, the servant of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the produce of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a solemn rest. The 8th day shall be a solemn rest. And you shall take on the first day the fruit of the splendid trees, the branches of palm trees, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. You shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths, or tabernacles, or tents for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, so that your generations may know that I am the people, that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And so the very first institution or re-practice of the religious holidays here is the Feast of Booths, the feast that reminds them of how God has delivered them from slavery in Egypt, as they've just been delivered from their bondage in Babylon. And so, I imagine this was a pretty emotional time as they think back on what their ancestors have gone through and now what they themselves have gone through and are about to have the opportunities to do in the future. And so, they're connecting with the generations that have gone before. I think there's a lot of value in setting aside time to remember the past. This is possibly, the first proper observance of the Feast of Booths since exile. This is one of those feast days where they all go up to Jerusalem, right? And they set out their tents outside of Jerusalem and they live there for the week. And this has probably not been observed, and if it has been, not fully for some 70 years. Perhaps for many, this might be the first time they've ever observed it. And so they're remembering, perhaps for the first time going through these motions, remembering what God's done and realizing that God's doing a very similar thing for them in their lives. That's kind of an interesting thought. Any thought on that?
Yeah, we know how many days they actually celebrate, Tabernacle, Passover.
Yeah. The Feast of Booths, I think, is 7 days, is what I'm saying. It's a week long, and then the 8th day, they have a day off, and then
Yeah, so that's practically all they did, because they didn't have what we have now. So that's all they had to do.
yeah.
It was the first time, that's been born, I think, you know? I hadn't thought about that. You know, obviously, a lot of folks were born in, you know, in bondage. So that gives a real lesson.
Yeah. Okay, so now they're going to start preparing to build. Pick up verse 7. So they gave money to the masons, to the carpenters, and food and drink and oil to the Sidonians, to the Tyrians, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea of Lebanon to the sea, to Joppa, according to the grant they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, in the second year after their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem in the second month, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, made a beginning together with the rest of their kinsmen. The priests and the Levites and all who had come to Jerusalem from their captivity, they appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to supervise the work of the house of the Lord. And Jeshua with his sons and his brothers, and Kadmiel and his sons, and the sons of Judah, together supervised the workmen in the house of God, along with the sons of Henadad and the Levites, their sons and brothers. And so one of the things you read through these books, there are a lot of names. Ezra was taking good notes. And so you have the materials, you need a lot of materials for a building project like this. Well, one of the things when we were going through in Israel and going on the trips that we got to go through is just, it's so mind-boggling to me, the ability of these people in ancient times to build the things that they build with the tools and the resources that they had. You know, to move enormous blocks of stone without modern cranes. It's just, it's kind of mind-boggling to me. But if you're going to build the house of God, you need a lot of materials to do that. And certainly, a lot of those materials that Solomon had collected have been destroyed, right? Nebuchadnezzar comes in and destroys a lot of those things, and so they're needing new materials. And you have, really, we're running out of time, but you have a very similar things that are being spoken of here that are being spoken of in 2 Chronicles when Solomon is getting the materials for the first temple. Solomon needs cedars of Lebanon. Solomon speaks with Hiram, the king of Tyre, and he gets, is it Tyre? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And gets some certain materials and all that. And so they're going about many of the same steps. They're trying to replicate as closely as possible to the building process of Solomon, I think. And so there's a lot of money that's going to be needed. It's going to be expensive. And so they all donate. Everyone donates as they can. And they purchase these things. And the work is done with a great deal of oversight. It tells you these are the people that are looking over the house of the Lord and that are supervising the work that's being done. And I think there's a principle here of, the work on the house of God is not something to be taken lightly. This needs to be done diligently and with a lot of care, with a lot of thought. And so we're not just, building this in a totally unique way. They're trying to follow the standards and the blueprints that God has set out. If you remember, the temple was basically just a more permanent version of the tabernacle. And you have all kinds of instructions in the Bible about the way these things are supposed to be constructed and built and, all those sorts of things. So they take the Levites. Why the Levites? Why not the, Judahs, or why not the Benjamins, or, why the Levites? I think probably because they're the ones that know the law the best, right? You know, they're the priestly class, they're the religious class, and so they're the ones that know what best how this should be done. And so they're supervising and making sure that's being done well. Okay, let's finish out the chapter and we'll wrap this up. Verse 10. When the builders laid the foundations of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, the Levites, the sons of Asaph, and the cymbals to praise the Lord according to the directions King David, the king of Israel. They sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord. For he is good, for the steadfast love endures forever towards Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and the Levites and the heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud with joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joyful shout from the sound of people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. So you have really these foundations finally completed after a lot of work. It took a lot of time. Well, maybe not a lot of time. They work pretty quickly, but it takes a lot of sweat and a lot of manpower. But they finally get this constructed, the foundations laid, and you have some mixed emotions. We're going to talk about 2 Chronicles 7 a little bit more in a couple of weeks. I probably should have just included that later. You know, this is going to be an occasion that's in comparison with what we saw with Solomon's temple. The glory of this temple is very little. And so you have the younger guys, the people that have been working diligently to get this done. They see the completion. They're excited, and they're happy, they're joyful, and they rejoice because we have done something great. We've rebuilt the foundation for the house of God. There's going to be now a place where our family, our family's family, for generations are going to be able to worship and remember God. And I had a part in doing that. And then on the other hand, you're going to have a lot of the priests and Levites and the old fathers of houses, the old guys, they're going to look at it and they're going to weep. The priests and the Levites, because they know what Solomon's temple probably should have been like, what it would have been like. The old men, because they had seen the old temple. And this is pitiful in comparison. So you got two really strong mixed reactions. Real quick, who's in the right? I think when you read Haggai and you read Zechariah, I think Zechariah in particular is a rebuke of the attitude of the old people. And Haggai says, you guys are misunderstanding. The temple is, this temple is going to be better than the one that was before. It may not look so pretty, but it's going to have a greater glory. And Zechariah says, is a rebuke of their poor attitude in Zechariah 4. And so there's great potential here, potential that needs to be met. This is going to be the temple that Jesus is going to go about his ministry in. And so this temple is going to be greater than the one before. All right, next week we're going to look at chapter 4. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.